Welcome to the Faith Science Podcast, Episode 4. I'm your host, Jerry Swafford, and on this podcast, we explore the integration of science with faith. Today's guest lives at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. He is the Chief Learning Officer at ChenMed and host of Future Focused. He is a devoted husband to Ashley and father of 7 children. Our guest today is Christopher Lind. Christopher, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jerry. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to
Sure.
it. We're going to have fun.
Yeah.
We're going
Yeah,
to have
this is
fun.
going to be fun. We were already talking a little bit before we got on here.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, the first place we could talk about the work and stuff, but devoted husband to Ashley, father of 7 children, I would assume that's kind of the core of what you do. So
Yeah.
how does one get to 7 kids?
Well, we won't talk through the specifics of it.
Oh yeah, well, not that part. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but it is a funny story in that my wife and I did not even know we were going to have kids. And so we got married in mid-20s, something like that. We've been married 16 years now. And I kind of it was our relationship was kind of a shock. We met on the internet before it was cool to meet on the internet.
Okay.
And she was a flight attendant in Colorado and I was living in Minnesota, traveling around the world doing stuff. And the internet dating thing was kind of new and taboo. And we met and we were like, do we meet during do we meet during a layover and see, is this gonna work? And we did, and both of us knew we're getting married. Weird. And so then we just happened to meet whenever it worked because she was a flight attendant. She would take layovers and we would get to know each other. And so it's this kind of quirky story. And we were so embarrassed to tell anybody that's how we met. So we had this whole thing about how we locked eyes at Subway at the airport and then got to know each other and laughed. And then people were like, it just feels like a fairy tale. And finally came out,
Yeah.
we're like, actually, we met through an internet dating site.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, kids, we weren't sure if we wanted kids. And then God just kind of said, well, yeah, no, you're going to have kids. And then he kept saying, and you're going to have more kids. And
Yeah.
they just kept coming. And so, yeah, it's a big part of my life. It's a huge part of my life. There's no way you can lead a family of 9 and not have it be a
Right.
huge part of your life. But I also am careful that does not become my defining identity, because at the end of the day, even that can be taken from me. And so I love and live to serve my family, but also I recognize I'm shepherding them as long as they're here, because I grew up in a funeral home. So mortality, I've got kind of a very interesting relationship with recognizing mortality is not guaranteed. Let's just say that.
So you were helping with the dead bodies and stuff?
Yeah. So I grew up in a funeral home. My dad, eventually my stepmom, were both funeral directors. So I was, helped at the funeral home. I would go help my dad do removals of bodies as a kid. Even when one of my good friends died, I went and helped take care of that. And so for me, knowing that tomorrow is not guaranteed,
Right.
I live that on a daily basis where it's like,
Oh,
I'm here today. I might not be tomorrow.
right. That is, yeah. So these 7 kids, or is it like 6 boys and a girl, or pretty even?
So we had this nice theme going. It was boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, and then boy through up our, nice engineered plan. And then we thought we were going to have number 7 was going to be a boy. All signs were indicating that. We didn't check with anything, but and then she came out and I was like, oh, we have a girl.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's 4 and 3.
4, oh, that's pretty even.
Yeah.
Because you hear about people that's kinda how they get to 7, because it's like all girls or all boys, and it's like, we're trying to get the other one, but this isn't like that. You're pretty
Nope.
even.
No.
Okay.
And I think anybody who knows me knows I know how little control I have over things. So yeah, no, we were never like, no, we gotta do this. Other than when we had once we had one, we were like, well, we don't want to just have one. But even that, we were like, oh, maybe we might only be able to have one. And then clearly that was not the case either.
Right. Okay, so you are a chief learning officer at ChenMed.
Yeah.
So what do I know you're in HR, so
Yeah.
does that mean you're training
Well,
people to
yeah,
bring
so I've
them
got
on?
it's one of those titles where people are like, what is that?
Yeah.
So I have responsibility. I oversee all of the ongoing employee development and training for our employees. So that, my teams, I've got a big bunch of teams that are responsible for everything related to that. But it's interesting because it's actually my first run in HR. So
Oh,
while I've been in, I like saying the human performance space, because most corporate training is, click through an e-learning or sit
yeah.
on this webinar and listen to somebody talk at you with PowerPoint. And I just can't stand that stuff. So that's where before this, I worked in businesses. I was the head of innovation at GE Healthcare, and we looked at like performance technology for human enablement and stuff like that. But yeah, so very much focus on how do you help people accomplish what they need to accomplish in a human-centric way for work. But then because of my tech background, it's always like, how do we do it better using technology?
Okay, so if you're not giving somebody like a video to watch or whatever the old way of doing it, how do you onboard people? How do you bring people on better than that
Yeah.
old way?
So I've got plenty of examples where I've done like what people might think as super futuristic, where it's like, we're going to put you in immersive simulation. You're going to, completely experience what this is. At
Yeah.
GE, we did some stuff where, we were running things out of a command center through augmented reality glasses, and we were training engineers as they were on site. We're actually working on machinery. So, I mean, I've done some of that super cool futuristic stuff. But then some of it's also just recognizing people are really creatures of habit. And so sometimes it's tapping into those rhythms of things that they do. So even some of the most successful things I've done have been, how do we use like text message engines to nudge people towards the behaviors we want them to take on a regular basis? So if you're a new hire this week, how do we nudge you to make sure you've set up lunch with all of your colleagues? And maybe we do that through a series of text nudges that help you along the way. Or how do we create a resource center that you can find what you need with a text conversation and just ask, hey, how do I do this? And then we use technology to scan policies and procedures to get you that information. So some of that stuff is where I'm always just looking for, what are we really trying to get people to do? And then how do you do that best? And sometimes it's a fancy solution. Sometimes it's, well, maybe you do need a video, but maybe that video doesn't need to be 6 hours of somebody talking
Right.
through a PowerPoint. Maybe it just needs to be a 2-minute little clip going, here's what you really need to know. The end. Get
Yeah.
back to your day.
Yeah, that would yeah, I think I did an internship with NASA one time, and like the onboarding part during the first part of the summer was stuff like that, where it would just be these videos, and then they give you some quiz here and there, and you're j I
I
like
call it the Clockwork Orange of
yeah,
training. You're just like,
and you
what is this?
nobody likes that. Nobody
No.
learns anything from that, and but I don't know if it's kind of a corporate thing where you have to show that you're doing it or
Yeah,
what?
I mean, so there are certain things, and I've been in a lot of different industries, a lot of time in healthcare, but it's not just unique to that. And a lot of times it is a legal, we as a company have to have a legal attestation that this has been accomplished. But I think sometimes that gets misinterpreted because, just as an example, I remember when I was in pharma in regulatory, which not a whole lot of wiggle room in terms of what you can get away with.
Right.
And the FDA was like, you have to demonstrate this. And for years, probably decades, It had been done. You have to watch 4 clock hours of training. Can't skip it, can't fast forward, like nothing. And I remember trying to fight that, going, what? Why do we do this to people? This is like
Right.
torture to a human being. And the answer was FDA requires it. And I'm always the one that goes, anytime somebody says you have to, I'm always like, why? Says who? What do you mean we have to? And so I remember they just kept going, well, FDA says. And so I said, well, then I'm going to ask FDA. And so I went straight to the FDA and actually dug into it. And they at first said, yes, that's what we require. But then I didn't quit. And I was like, but what are you really trying to get at here?
Yeah.
And it was about demonstrating competence. Do you understand and are able to apply these things? And I was like, if I can get people to demonstrate competence, would you be fine with whatever it is? And they're like, well, at least if it's according to our quality standards. I'm like, fine. And so we completely did away with it. And it was more of these are the things you have to be able to do with this information. And so we were able to do a quick simulation that showed, hey, you know how to do it? Great. We're done. Nothing else. And FDA was like, yeah, that's actually better. Wow. What do you
Right.
know? It's actually better. You demonstrated people were able to do a thing instead of force them to go through 4 hours of, yeah. So I get spicy on this. I don't always get along
Yeah.
with my peers because this can sometimes not be a popular topic.
Right. Yeah. So you're in pharmaceuticals. So we've heard kind of like bits and pieces of your story, but like how do you get from helping your parents with the funeral home business to where you are now as chief learning officer? Like how do you get from there to where you are now?
Yeah.
Um,
So I had a interesting background. Um, and so very young, I was very introverted, didn't necessarily get along well with, I mean, I did, but I never really fit in. I've never felt like I ever fit in my whole life.
mhm.
Um, but I loved computers as a kid. And so everybody thought, well, he's going to be a computer nerd, I'm sure, awkward, doesn't fit in, isn't a jock, plays with computers. I'm sure, all the stereotypes.
Right.
This guy is going to go off and do something with that. And when I was young, even though I was a little like rebellious, I was like, well, I don't know what else to do. And obviously grown-ups must know better than I do. So if they're telling me that that's what I'm supposed to do, that's what I'm going to do. So I went off to college, did a 3-2 program. It's going to be a software engineer. And I got into it and I was like, this is just not what it is I'm supposed to be doing. I don't know what I'm
Mhm.
supposed to be doing, but it's clearly not this.
Yeah.
Um, and again, nobody knew what to do with me. And they're like, well, you're a technical person. You don't like techno. I'm like, well, no, I do like it. I just don't want to sit at a desk and code all day.
Yeah.
And no, and this was back in the early 2000s. Like nobody knew what to do with that. So like, you should teach. That's what you should do. You're really good at explaining these really complicated, obscure topics to people. So teach. And again, I don't know any difference. So I'm like, sure. So I went to school and finished school doing middle school math and computer science. And I was like, well, super boring topics. I think they're fascinating and I have a bit of a personality flair. So sure, I guess I can teach middle schoolers why this is awesome. And I did. And I got into it and went, this is not how people learn. Like this system is so broken.
Yeah.
But institutions don't like to be told that. And so here I am in the public school system going, um, this isn't how I'm going to teach. I'm actually going to do it how it actually works. And the system goes, oh no, we have tests that people have to pass. And I get it. It's like, well, our funding is tied to these tests. And if they don't, and so I was like, well, then I guess this isn't for me. And so I really was kind of lost. didn't know what to do. And then again, people were like, well, go into sales. You've been teaching people. I think that's just what you tell people when you don't know what to tell them.
Right.
And again, totally lost, didn't know what to do. And you're in your early 20s, and RJ Reynolds cigarettes, tobacco, had an opportunity that came with a company car and a gas card. And I went, this looks cool. So I guess I'll do that. And I got into it and hated it, absolutely hated it. But the company called me. My boss called once and was like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "What do you mean? What am I doing?" And they're like, "No, what are you doing? Since you've joined, the region has gone up." And I was like, "Well, I don't know. Like I talk to all the people in the region, and I build all these tools to help them be better at their job because it works for me. And I think, why would I just do it for myself? If I help everybody else, it's better for them anyway." And they're like, "You're new." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know, but I figured it out and just figured I'd help people with it." And they're like, "Do you want to help us build an onboarding program?" And that was when I was like, "A what? What's
Mm.
that?" And they're like, "Well, you spend your time figuring out what people need to do their jobs, and you help build something that helps them be successful when they're new." I was like, "I don't know what that is, but that definitely, can I do what I'm doing now?" And they said, "Yeah." And so I got into this corporate training, but again, never really fit in because I didn't do the usual thing. And
Mm.
then I didn't really follow a lot of the rules of what you're supposed to do with your career, because then I'm like, well, I can't keep working at a cigarette company. This is not my thing.
Yeah.
And I got into mobile devices, and I was watching the technology trend going, how do people not understand smartphones are the thing? Because that was back in the day when people were like, well, you need on your email on your phone. That's so stupid. And I'm going,
Right.
what? This is the future. And a small mobile cell company was like, can you help explain to companies this? Because we want obviously them to buy our products, and I'm like, sure. So I did that. And then I got into healthcare with a software company because physicians were like, why would we keep medical records on computers? We got into medicine for people. And I'm like, you don't get it. This is where the world is going. And so I got into that. And then, yeah, then I got into higher education because I went, this is so broken. Like, this? And so my career has been,
Yeah.
I just end up going where I see problems and somebody goes, can you help us fix this? And I go, yeah, sure. I'd love to.
Yeah. Okay. So you've mentioned education a couple of times. So you started off in middle school with math and computer science, and then you've
Yep.
done some stuff with higher education. And I mean, even the training in some ways is education. But if we go kind of to public school for a second, if you became the public school czar, what what would you say about that? Do we need to just blow the whole thing up and do something different, or do you is there something salvageable there where if you had that power, if
Yeah.
that's the next problem that came up, they said, "Hey, Christopher, like you have this background in education. What should we do to improve our schools?"
So here's where I would say I've been through a lot in my life. And in doing so, I've learned that there can be this initial tendency when you see something that's broken to say, burn the whole thing down.
Right.
Just like burn it down and let's start from the ground up. But that never works, because when you burn it down, it creates a vacuum that just creates something just as dysfunctional in its place. And so when I look at the way we do public school or school in general, because college isn't any better, like honestly,
Yeah.
most of it's not any better. There are certain things about it that can be salvaged, and there's some infrastructure in place that can happen. But I think what's largely missing in education is there's far too much focus on what you know versus what you're able to demonstrate, which is actually
Mm.
extremely discriminating as well. Because over the years, I've known many, many brilliant, brilliant minds who maybe they just couldn't articulate it in the way that a traditional system accepted, but they could demonstrate it
Yeah.
in crazy ways that you go, whoa, you understand this better than anybody else. And so there's more of this focus on, can we get you to regurgitate facts and information instead of going, what is the purpose of this? And then how can we rethink ways to allow people to demonstrate and experiment and practice with that? And that actually can fit within the existing infrastructure and institution. Now, granted, it's a ton of work,
Yeah.
but it would require re-engineering that. And I know it's a ton of work because even in a corporate L&D team, when I come take over a corporate L&D team, sometimes the L&D team is the hardest thing to change, because you come in and go, yeah, everything you've ever been doing, we're going to do it differently. And people cling tightly to what they know.
Yeah.
But no, I think you absolutely can. And I know when COVID hit, one of the things that was heavy on my heart was I looked at all these schools that were just going, what do we do? Like, we didn't know
Right.
what to, like, how on earth teach kids remotely? And like, and I was like, I can help you with this. And I leaned in, and you want to talk about a time when schools were like, fine, if we need to rethink, like
Yeah.
we don't got a choice. And so, yeah, there's room to fix it, but it requires people being willing to say, what we've done isn't all bad, so let's not burn it down,
Mhm.
but also letting go of the fact that what you've done maybe could be done differently or better.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So, so you did this stuff with education, and you now say you live at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. So,
Yeah.
is that basically you had this intersection of these different backgrounds, or was this
Yeah,
something
I
that
think
was
it was
intentional?
me finally coming to terms with, that's actually what I've always done. I sometimes say I'm trilingual in that
Uh-huh.
it's like, I understand business, I understand the economics of it, of the operations. I've really have always felt like more of a business operator. My mentors were always COOs, things like that. So I understood, like, yeah, you can't just say this because academic theory says that's how it works. Like, well, that's not how it works in real life.
Right.
This is how it actually works. But then I always had this technology bend where I understood and saw the potential in technology while seeing also the risks, but then have always just cared deeply about people. And so I'm like, how do we keep people at the center of this? Because technology can destroy people. And we see that now with some of the stats around mental health and depression as
Yeah.
social media. Who thought a like button could cause suicide rates to skyrocket? And you're like, well,
Yeah.
I could have told you that because of some of the vulnerabilities of human psychology.
Yeah. So you mentioned before you considered yourself an introvert um as a young child. Like, when I think about, I consider myself an introvert. The definition
Yeah.
I often go to is this idea of recharging more alone or with small groups of people versus someone who is an extrovert who would recharge or have an
Yeah.
energy increase when they are more around a lot of people. Would you still say that you're introverted, and how has that maybe helped
For
with that
sure.
human experience part
For
that you're talking
sure.
about?
And what's funny about that is when people meet me, although very few people have physically met me, they've met me digitally. Um, People are like, "You're not introverted." And I'm like, "I don't think you know what introverted means,"
Right.
because I used to even buy into the stereotype where I was like, introvert, I'm quiet, I'm weird, like I don't know how to engage. And I was awkward and whatever. And so I thought, well, I guess I'm just introverted. So I'm just gonna be quiet and stay in the back of the room and whatever. And quite frankly, in a public setting, like I would much rather be the dude at the back table with his hood pulled over his head, kind of
Right.
like chatting up with the person next to me than up on the stage. But what I discovered was, and this is where my dad is not introverted, or yeah,
Oh,
no, he is not. Like the man lives on public engagement. And so I got to see that. And I've always been a student of human behavior. And so I always have watched. And so learning from him, I was like, okay, over time I learned being introverted doesn't mean you need to be quiet and in the back of the room, but I have to then operate differently. And, in my career, I remember having a mentor once who said, yeah, this whole like working remotely and being digital, you're never going to be successful if that's what you do. And you tell me I can't do something, that is a really good way to motivate me to
Right.
try and go, oh, really? And so that's where I went, okay, so how do I be introverted differently? Because going to conferences and standing up on a big stage and being in front of people, yeah, I'll do it if I have to, but I'd much rather have bamboo shoots shoved up my fingernails than do that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I knew there was something about it that was necessary to build relationships, to establish a reputation and so I'm like, I have to reverse engineer this and then figure out a different way to do it.
Mm, yeah. So yeah, I'm finding the same thing that if the more you are able to interact with people, there's like, oh yeah, you can't be introverted or you're doing these things publicly. Well, you can't be introverted, but I
Yeah.
think there's a confusion of shyness and awkwardness with introversion. So, and then I'll have these people that seem to be very outgoing. They'll come up to me and say when they hear that I'm introvert, yeah, 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 me too. And
Mhm. Oh,
it's like
if I go do even a virtual event,
yeah,
I have to almost go take a nap afterwards. If I go do
yeah,
something in person, I better block off like 2 days to just go home and sleep, not turn on anything. I mean, it's
right,
hard to get any sort of peace and quiet with 9 kids or 9 people in the house. But I mean,
right.
it's very much a like type of thing.
Yeah, yeah, it's a lot. So when you talk about business and technology, how do you integrate those into your belief system, your faith?
Yeah.
How does that work? Where does that figure into the things you do?
So my testimony is a crazy one. But through it all, how I came to become a Christian and really follow Jesus. For me, it was one of those, this is so ingrained into everything. There's no way it can't. Like, it is the foundation, the bedrock of, well, I actually struggle sometimes when I see people compartmentalize it and go, oh, no, that's like
Right,
the faith part. And I'm like, what? How is that separate? I literally, my brain just doesn't work that way because everything is so integrated into it. And so even the way I look at why I do the things I do around people, it's because I see people made in the image of God. They have an imago Dei. I care deeply about them. And I'm like, well, if you care deeply about them, then you care about their success and their development. You want to bring out the best in them. It drives everything. When I think about technology, I go, well, it's a tool. And in Genesis, we were told to rule over creation. So we have an obligation to rule over it,
right,
but it has to be governed by some sense of truth. Well, how do you define truth? Well, so for me, I've always really struggled with this. Like, well, where does your faith intersect? I'm like, everywhere.
right.
So yeah,
Yeah,
it's a tough question for me to answer because I'm like, I
yeah,
actually don't know how to separate the two.
right. So is there is so like if when you're a middle school teacher, I mean, it's not necessarily that you're um like pulling out scriptures or something like that, but
No.
it's certainly something that is within everything you're doing and
Yeah.
whether you're doing corporate work or whatever it is, it's the foundation of everything.
Right. And
What
that's
makes
where
sense.
people even people who listen to my live stream and stuff, there are times where I will reference how maybe an interpretation or how the book of Ecclesiastes will come up because I'm like, we say everything's new under the sun, but it's not new. So
Yeah,
I'll use it to help people go, this is how, when people go, look at this shiny new bauble, my reaction is, well, it's not new. So let's understand what it is because there's components of this that are the same. But yeah, I don't have to go, thus saith the Lord. It just, I don't feel the need to do that, but it
right.
does help shape the way that I think about things. And if asked, or if I get into a conversation, well, why do you really care so deeply about people? Well, then it'll come out, because I'll go, well, because it's what I fundamentally believe about people and the way people should be treated. Well, why do you think that, Christopher? Well, because I live in submission to this. And then they're like,
Right.
oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So yeah, one of the questions I get most often, we talked about this a little bit before coming on, is this question of AI and where it figures into the future, and we be afraid of this? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And my answer is just generally that much of the fear that is out there about AI is because there are people who do not have a Christian
Yeah,
worldview, or a
I would
worldview
agree.
that's theistic, that they're afraid of AIs becoming gods. They're afraid of, or they think of us as just basically these meat machines,
Correct.
that the brain came about over however long they want to say, and it is this thing that came about through random processes. It's not that a god made it. And so my thing is, if you understand that there is a God and he designed things and he is in control over the world, then you don't have that same fear that these people often have. And you talk a little bit about AI in some of your work. I'd be interested to know your thoughts about how you
Yeah.
talk to people about this and how your faith figures into that.
So here's where I think I will tell you, this is not a great way to, like, if you want to blow up on social media, don't have nuanced approaches to things, because that's not what gets clicks. People don't want to hear, well, it's complicated. They want to
Yeah.
hear AI is going to end the world, or they want to hear AI is stupid and it's never going to do anything.
Right.
And what I see is it shouldn't drive fear. And I think, just from a biblical standpoint, God, like, love drives out all fear. So I think that's one of those, like, I don't fear AI one bit. I have a very healthy respect for it,
Hmm.
because I know what it's capable of. And I also know the frailties and vulnerabilities of humanity and what we tend to do. And I've seen the story of what humans do without God. And so I
Right.
see what you can do with AI, and I go, yeah, we're going to see some really, really bad things happen, because it is extremely powerful.
Hmm.
So I think that's where, when I look at it, I go, it's going to become a god. Well, that's the oldest trick in the book. Going back to Genesis 3, that's exactly how Satan, like, you can become God. Just eat this fruit. So of course, like, I look at AI and go, oh, gee, I wonder if there's going to be people who are going to fall for this belief that somehow, if they take this fruit, they can be like God. Wow,
Yeah.
that's not a new trick type of a thing. And I get where it can be very scary, in that if you don't have this belief that your identity doesn't come from what you do, it comes from the person who created you, then the idea that a technology is now doing things that I used to do, and if it's doing that, then maybe I'm somehow less valuable. And
Mm.
oh, so I get where the fear comes from. Just understanding cognitive psychology and just really understanding how we've been created. So I see where some of that is. And I think the enemy knows that, and he's going to use that against us.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I was on a podcast where I talked about, I think there are going to be people who think the path to eternal life is AI. And I think they're going to make some really stupid mistakes along the way,
Yeah.
because it looks and presents like, oh, wow. I had I was on a Christian podcast once, and people misunderstood me because they heard me talk about this idea of, oh, download your consciousness and then load it into a humanoid robot and you'll live forever. And they're like, I can't believe as a Christian you would say that. And I'm like, no, no, no. I didn't say that it can happen. I said there will be a perception that it can. And
Yeah.
that's the scary part, is it will present close enough that if you don't hold to something true, I mean, you don't learn how to identify fake $100 bills by studying phonies.
You're
You
right.
study the real thing. And then when you see the phony, you go, oh, yeah, I'm not going for that. But if you haven't studied that, you're going to go, wow, I can never die. I can overcome mortality with this
Yeah.
technology. And there's going to be people selling it and there's going to be people falling for it.
Yeah.
Um, and so I see some of that real risk. On the flip side, I see a lot of Christians who are afraid of AI because they think it's Azazel or Satan somehow is becoming incarnate into these algorithms. And I'm like, one, that's not how this stuff works. But technically, could he use it in a way? Sure, but he could also use your best friend in the same way. So
Yeah.
you got to understand he's not limited to these weird powers and the AI is going to do this to us. What? We've been given rulership over creation. We don't need to be afraid of this
Yeah.
type of a thing. But yeah, you got to recognize there's a healthy respect that has to come with it. So
Yeah.
that's where I have a very complicated, nuanced worldview where I hear people's fears and I go, yes. Should you be concerned about your job? Yes.
Yeah.
Should you be concerned about your job solely because AI is coming to steal who you are as a person? No. But there's a whole lot of middle ground in there where I'm like, all right, yeah, you know what? I had a conversation with someone the other day who's like, I'm not going to change and AI will never take this from me. And I was like,
Okay.
there were lamplighters and, switchboard operators who thought the same thing.
Yeah.
And I'm just telling you, you can be a typewriter repairman in 2024, but you're probably not going to be super successful.
Yeah.
So it's complicated.
Yeah, that's not, I mean, there's always been technology advances and innovation. So the idea of this thing is here, it's not just coming, it's here. So
It's here.
to not be a part of it. And again, the fear you brought up of Satan using this, I mean, or using any kind of technology like social media or any of that, it's interesting because why would it's a tool, so why would God's people not be trying to use it? But it's almost as if we're going to wait until like Satan takes it over or the world takes it over, and then we will try to use it rather than maybe we can have godly influence behind the
Yeah.
AIs that we're building
I
right
mean, the
now.
number of advisory conversations I have, and I'm on boards where I'm not going back to your earlier point. I'm not sitting here going, well, in blah, 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 the book
Yeah.
of whatever, this is how we should, but I'm bringing a Christian ethic to, hey, we should not use this technology to exploit people. So recognizing that, like, how do we make decisions as a business or about the way we train our AI? Like, let's bring ethics and morals and values to this. And it's actually been really welcome because people go, well, that's an interesting perspective that we should consider. And
Yeah.
we hadn't thought about it that way. So we actually have an opportunity. And that's where I'm really trying to help other believers see, like, don't run from this. Have a healthy respect for it because it's going to play on every vulnerability you have,
Right.
like hardcore. But if anything, know that, go in eyes wide open, and then actually help influence what happens. Because to your point, it's here.
Yeah.
It's not going away. Train left
No.
the station. There's no like, well, I'll wait till in my bunker in my backyard till AI blows up. Like Skynet ain't coming,
No.
and just that's not a way to live your life.
Yeah. So like for me, like I'm excited about what's happening. I think also because I worked so I started working on AI stuff maybe 10 years ago, and it wasn't obviously the last 3 or 4 years it has taken off.
Yes.
But you could consider the time maybe when I was in started working on it is what they call an AI winter, where
Yep.
the software hasn't caught up with some of the mathematical algorithms
Yep.
that we're going to use, and so things aren't going great at the time. So back in,
Well,
if
then
you
you
think about
came in
2013,
just
yeah.
before like the neural network
Right.
deep learning started really taking off in
Exactly.
2017, which really, so you got to see like, oh, we're kind of like in this weird ceiling
Yeah.
phase. Like, what are we going to, and then
Yeah, so basically I'm working on neural network stuff before, you were able to train the deep neural networks, which just
Yep.
all deep means is that they're just bigger. And
Yeah.
so I was when I first started, we were using neural networks that had one hidden layer. Now you can have hundreds of hidden layers with hundreds or thousands of neurons. And so that was I was working on I remember like using like really trying to manipulate weights on a single hidden layer neural network, and then basically they came up with the algorithms that could actually train a deep network,
Okay.
and then that really was
Yeah.
this foundational thing that opened up everything,
Yeah, it's like
because
the
once that
skeleton key
started
went
working.
click, click, and you
Right.
heard the pins drop, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, here we go.
Oh, yeah, because, I mean, neural networks have been around for decades, but
Yeah.
you couldn't train them fast at all, and so once you got to, okay, we can actually make these really big ones, so then that means there's a lot of things that we can now do, a lot of features that we can now expose with
Yep.
these neural networks. That unlocked everything, and so then you have all of a sudden basically chess masters getting beat.
Yep.
The game of Go, they created this
Okay, go. Yeah.
yeah,
Or not okay, go, but yeah,
so the AlphaGo
AlphaGo.
AI basically beat the best Go player on earth, and
Like,
that was
really
just
quick. It was a
and it
crazy
happened
story.
quick. And yeah, that's that entire story. There's a documentary about it on Netflix. If and so that happened, and then of course we have, Chat GPT, this generative
Yeah, the Transformers
AI,
just
and so when they came up with transformers, that was another thing. But all of that is built on top of the deep neural networks. That's
Yep.
the thing that got unlocked, and I was kind of in the middle of
Yeah, you were right
working
there.
on it, and then seeing that and going, and so that's what's opened up everything. But there's going to come a point, there's going to become a limit there. And I think what's interesting to think about right now is that we don't you were talking about this idea of us not really knowing, or us not really being able to tell, like you could put somebody's consciousness in a humanoid, but we don't know what a soul is. We don't know what intelligence is. And so we have this thing called artificial intelligence. But if we were to actually try to define it, we don't know what that is.
Mm-mm.
And so you can't truly duplicate something you don't know what it is. And I
Right.
think that's one of the biggest parts about all of this, that when we're talking about God designing us and making us, these things like souls and intelligence, we don't know what that is. And so the idea that we're going to just somehow duplicate it is something that a lot of people don't understand. You can't just duplicate it, because if I ask you what sentience is, what does it mean to be conscious?
Right.
We just kind of,
Yeah.
and again, the best the philosophers of our time can't answer this right now. So,
No. No,
um,
they try and they talk
yeah,
about, but they even they get hung up where they're like, I mean, now we're kind of talking about certain things that we do, but it's not really answering the question of what it is.
right. And so, yeah, so in that case, when people are saying thinking that this is going to go to a place of that we're actually going to have real intelligence or real sentience, that we're going to be able to make these robots actually think that they exist, at best it's only going to present as such, but
Yeah.
it's not going to actually be sentience, because we
It'll
don't
be a
even know what it
veneer.
is. Yeah. And we're going to reach a limit of deep neural networks, frankly, that I don't know where that is, and there's gonna be a lot of cool things that happen before we get there, but there's gonna come a point at which we're gonna hit a wall in terms of the kinds of things people are wanting. They're
Yep.
wanting to, again, essentially create humans, and we're gonna hit a wall there. I don't know where it is exactly, but it's interesting to think about that.
Yeah.
So for you, you have the Future Focus podcast. I'm just interested in, what are you excited about right now? Is it the company? Is there some new problem that you're going to be working on soon that you're really excited about? Oh,
For me, and this is probably why I will never be like the founder of some company, because I can never stay focused on just the one thing. Because I'm
uh,
like, what I'm excited about is like, this is unlocking possibilities. It's almost like we've been given a new set of tools, where
mhm,
before we were like, well, these are the only tools we have. And all of a sudden it was like, well, we just made all your tools power tools. And it's like, whoa.
right.
We got power tools and heavy equipment now. Sheepers. Imagine what we can do with that.
Yeah.
These have been the ceilings we've hit before, but now those ceilings might have just gotten blown off. And that's where I get excited and also nervous, because I look at certain things and I go, ooh, that has done, a good example of this. You look at what pornography has done
Yeah.
to society, and you go, oh, this is now blowing the ceiling off of that, off
Right.
something that is literally eroding society. And you go, oh, and now like we're going to have that on the next level. But then I look at other things where I talk to people where, whoa, we can diagnose lung cancer by somebody breathing into a tube for half a second because AI can diagnose this.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Like we can now treat, I mean, when I was at GE, we can now be accurate in our detection of diseases much earlier and catch this stuff and treat. That's super exciting.
Yeah.
Education, neural disorders that people have who have struggled with. I talked to somebody the other day. They've cracked how to fix dyslexia because they now, AI has learned, oh, this is what's going on in the brain. We reverse engineer it and we can rewire it. And you're like, how cool is, like, how do you not get
Yeah.
excited about some of these incredible things? But again, I always look at it through the lens of the Bible to go, okay, where are the paths we can take that we're leaning into what we were called to do to make the world a better place, to raise other people up, to take care of the poor, the widow, the things like that, where we go, how do we do more to bring out the best? And then I look at other things and go, yeah, but you can also use this to exploit and destroy. And,
Yeah.
and so I think that's where I'm constantly walking in this tension. And sometimes the option's both. And it's like, ooh,
Yeah.
so how are we going to navigate it? Because one might be really tempting, but that's not the one that we should be taking.
Right. So you have this background in business, but you're saying you don't see yourself as a founder at all.
Not really. And no, because I've had lots of companies who have wanted to partner with me and be like, hey,
Yeah.
would you do that? And I'm like, I'm excited about that, but I'm not that excited about it because ultimately that's one in yet a million things. And I love engaging with, I mean, the number of companies I work with and talk to where I'm like, let me help you navigate it because you're way smarter than this than I am. And I don't have that gift, but
Yeah.
I can help you see how to make the most of the gift you've been given. And that's really, I think, the secret sauce that I've been gifted is I
Hmm.
help bring the best out in other people and other
Yeah.
people's ideas. And I am fine with that. I don't need to be the one who has the brilliant idea that, like, oh, Christopher Lynn did this. Who cares about Christopher Lynn? If Christopher
Hmm.
Lynn makes everybody else 10 times better, then I feel like I've achieved what I want.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. Like, so are you teaching? So you wouldn't see yourself, I guess, as entrepreneurial. You would see yourself as really kind of helping the entrepreneur. But
I
at
have
it,
no idea. I have no, what, because again, depending on how you define entrepreneur, I think some people define entrepreneur as like you go off and do your own thing. And it's like, well, I mean, I don't see that as entrepreneur. I think that's like you're a business owner. Could I
Mhm.
see doing what I do and not working for a corporation and going and maybe doing that full time? I guess,
Mhm.
maybe. To me,
Yeah.
entrepreneur is like you created the thing. Like Steve Jobs created the iPhone, and even though he didn't, but like that,
Right.
Bill Gates, Microsoft, like, whoa,
Yeah.
do I think there's ever a world where people go, this is the legacy Christopher Lynn led? No, because I'm not that important and I don't want that.
Yeah. So I mean, your legacy will ultimately more so be your children, not necessarily and your family, not necessarily a company that you build or something like that. So, you live in, you said Wisconsin, is that right?
Yep. Yep.
And so, but are you originally from there? That's where the funeral home and stuff was?
No, well, so I am from Colorado. The growing up was largely in Minnesota.
Okay.
And so that's kind of where I spend a lot of time, around the funeral home and stuff like that. And then I've moved all over for work and stuff like that. So I
Okay. So
happen to
you
be here now.
okay. So you would consider yourself as being from Minnesota, I guess. That's where you kind of grew
I
up in.
guess. Yeah, I
Yeah.
really feel more at home in Colorado, to be honest with you. I'm much more of like if Christopher were just to disappear, it'd be
Uh-huh.
because he just packed up his family and moved into some remote cabin in the Rockies of Colorado and just
Okay.
went off the grid. And you only ever accessed him through the internet because he never came out.
Is that the dream? Is that where you want to
Mm,
end up?
maybe, but at the same time, I love serving people too much.
Uh-huh.
So really the dream, I would love to create almost like a resort, a retreat that I use to allow people to come and gift people. I know a lot of people can't take vacations. A lot of people don't have the opportunity. I would love to be able to do that and then also be able to run something where, I'm helping people understand what the future looks like. So who
Right.
knows? I have no idea. Every time I plan, God just chuckles. He's like, "That's so cute. You think that's what you're gonna do? That's not
Yeah,
what you're gonna
yeah.
do."
Right. Well, we talked a little about the book because on your profile you have this book called Relentless Intention,
Yeah.
and so I looked it up, and but again, apparently it's not available for sale, but you have it.
Yeah.
So, like, what is that book about, and why did you write it?
Yeah. So I I swore I'd never write a book. I like writing, but I'm like a book. That's not me. I don't like, oh, author. Like that's what you're supposed to do. You go, you get your career, you make it this far, then you go write a book and then you create a course on your book. And I was just like, nah, that's not, I won't do it. But then I literally woke up in the middle of the night and I went, no, I have a story to tell. And the story is really the story of my life and some of what on paper would look like tragedy and chaos. And you would just go, this is tragedy and chaos. Like there's nothing good that can come from this. But how I've navigated that by going, there's a way to walk through this and see this differently. And I've always kind of had that where I've gone, well, this is the situation I'm in, but here's what can be taken from that. And here's how to navigate an impossible situation. You're faced with what seems like an impossibility, but actually it's not. Nothing's actually impossible if you're rooted in the right things. And oh, turns out, look at this. There's this hidden door right here that I was able to just walk through and go through this impossible pass. And so it's me connecting a lot of some of the biggest stories in my life that like present as, oh, that sucks. Or, oh man, that would be so hard. And then it's like, actually, it wasn't,
Yeah.
which is the most counterintuitive thing you would ever think is like, wait, what do you mean that wasn't hard? Well, I mean, I guess there were hard things about it, but actually, I saw it through a different lens. And so then the path became very clear.
Yeah. So I think part of the subtitle had to do with goal setting. So what is your approach to goal setting? Um,
Yeah.
what There are some people that are like, I don't
It
set
really was
goals.
about getting
Yeah.
deep into what really are you trying to do? And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes a lot of people think. They focus on activities as outcomes. And so when you do that, you don't realize you're painting yourself inside a box that you can't get out of. Like I want to make $1 million. That's not a goal. That's an outcome. Like that, or that's an activity. You want to get to why? Why do you want to get to $1 million? What are you going to do with $1 million? Maybe you don't need $1 million. Like, did it ever occur to you that you've set this goal that actually doesn't serve any sort of purpose other than, well, then you get to it and then you go, well, now what? And so it's actually about getting really down to purpose. Like what purpose, what outcome are you really striving towards? Because when you really see that, and that's where I say relentless intention is about getting to the core of what are you really trying to do here? Because once you realize that, you suddenly realize you're playing on a game board that previously you didn't see.
Right.
And I think that's been the story of my life is impossible situations where once I went, well, actually, what am I really here to do? You go, oh, Like there's nothing but opportunity and different avenues that I can take.
Okay, so yeah, so you would so do you do like do you do like quarterly goals or yearly goals or that kind of thing, or are you more of a I just want a big picture kind of see what
So I
I'm
think it's
interested in
all of
and
the above. And I think this
okay.
is where part of the book is me sharing that there's a lot of, again, and this is why it probably would never be a bestseller, even if I published it. There's a lot of nuance and complexity because people are like, what are the 4 steps? Do I do
Right.
goals quarterly? And I'm like, maybe. And it's like, what? Annually? Maybe. Sometimes it might be annual. Sometimes it might be quarterly. It might be daily. It might actually be 10 times a day, depending on the situation. People are like, well, that doesn't give me the 5 steps to success. And I'm like, that's because there are no 5 steps to success. That's the
Right.
challenge. And as long as you keep looking at it through that lens, you're never going to get where you want to go or where God has planned for you.
Mhm. Yeah. So
So
yeah,
it's
like
actually about helping people see the complexity and going, oh, so the
okay.
secret is to not become overly rigid in this while still having some of the guiding principles. And what are those guiding principles that you can plant? And then if you
Mhm.
let those guiding principles be your guide, then actually you don't get hung up and tripped up in the weeds of, is it step 3 or do I do Y on this time and all this other stuff?
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. So, I mean, eventually you're when it feels right, you'll publish it and we can get
And for the
access to it.
meantime, when people ask, they'll go, can I read it?" And I'm like, "Sure, yeah, I don't care. It's fine. I'll send you a PDF copy." It's all
Right.
done.
Okay, good. So like so it's pretty much finished. You
Oh, it's
don't
totally
you
finished.
it's not even a thing that you would even go back and need to edit or update or anything. It's good.
Mhm.
You
I
got it
mean,
where
I
you
could
want
I
it.
could probably add more chapters now.
Oh,
I
okay.
could add more chapters to it, I guess, if I wanted. But no, I mean, I even got I've even got the intro written by a really well-known person out of Duke, and it's done. I've got all the notes from people who've read it, and I did all the steps. I just really felt like it's not time to publish it. I'm like, okay,
Mhm. Okay. Well, all right. So we're gonna kind of head into the final four
sure,
big questions and then we'll kind of start bringing it to a close. So the
okay,
first question is what's a book other than the Bible? Of course, we're always going to recommend that, but
yeah,
what is a book that you are currently recommending to people? Like when you see somebody just like, "Hey,
sure.
I didn't we didn't even talk about whether you're a reader or not or you're a big book guy, but what's a book that you would recommend to people?"
So I'm not. It's funny. That's another reason why I didn't want to write a book because I'm like, I'll never read a book. Like, there's books I've read, but it's
Right.
normally like happenstance where I happen to, and then I just get sucked into it, and then I read it in an afternoon, and then whatever. But I follow and know a lot of authors, and there's certain people that I'm like, nope, I know what this book is about, and I know who that author is, and this is a good book that I would recommend. And probably my current one is by Brent Hansen. Life is hard, God is good, let's dance. And knowing him and knowing the story he's communicating in that, I think it'd be an encouragement to a lot of people right now
Mhm.
because he really leans into this. Life is really hard,
Right.
and this pretending it's not, and it's great, and I smile all the time when the world's burning behind me. No, it is hard, but God is good even in that really hard. And my life story is examples of that. And I think it's just that accepting that healthy tension lets you just go, let's dance about it. Cause like what else, what else is there? And I think especially as I see the environment we're in right now,
Mhm.
I'm like, it's a book I think a lot of people need to read.
Okay. And so he's a friend of yours, or
No,
you
no,
just
I
kinda
know
follow
of
him or
him. I know people who know him. And I've listened to enough of his stuff to be like, yep, it's a good book. I know what he's trying to communicate, and I know people who have read it. And what I've said, is it this? They're like, yeah, why have you read it? And I'm like, no, but I know what he's saying because it's
Right.
probably something that I would say myself, and I know what he's getting at.
Okay. All right. So next question is what is an interesting quote or scripture you've been thinking about lately?
I spend a lot of time. I don't know that I have a specific verse other than, and I'm terrible at knowing them, but um, the verse where in Philippians, Paul says, I will bring, like, the thing I started in you, I will bring to completion.
Hmm.
And I think I always sometimes wrestle with like the book where I'm like, is it ever going to be complete? Is this ever going to happen? Am I ever going to see this? Having 7 kids, sometimes you're like, is there ever going to be a day where my life isn't just inundated with children as much as I love them?
Yeah.
And it's kind of this constant reminder of I don't let anything go incomplete. And so if I started it in you, I will finish it. It just might
Yeah.
not be how you think. It's not on your timeline.
Yeah.
So just rest in that. And sometimes when I'm wigging out going, but this doesn't like the book, but I wrote the whole thing and I asked all these people and I'm not publishing it yet. And it's like, correct. But do you really think I didn't inspire you to go through this exercise for a reason? And okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So then I'm going to trust in that. Or when I find out we're expecting number 7 and you go, what, 7? Like are you, do you think I wouldn't start something that I didn't have a purpose for and don't plan to finish well? Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And I deal with it all the time with the tech where you're just like, what, where's this going? What's it? All right. All right. You finish what you started and you always
Mhm.
do. And it's always for your good and our good, ultimately, even if it doesn't feel like that. And for me, I'm like, all right, that's what takes me off the ledge.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I mean, yeah, I'm gonna have to look that up. I was talking to one of my sisters the other day, and she was talking about this idea that there are all these areas of her life where she doesn't have closure, and it kind of sounds similar to what you're talking about. This idea of completion or bringing something to a finish.
Yep.
And she said, "Well, there's all this anxiety that can be associated with that." And
Yeah.
so, um,
Philippians
yeah,
1:6.
yeah,
That's what
okay,
it is. He who
all
began a
right.
good work in you will bring it to completion.
He will bring it to completion. So that's where the faith comes in. If you
And I
know,
and I
you
see
will.
that again growing up in the funeral home. I saw this all the time. People spent their whole lives just trying to but I got to get it done. I got to do it. And it's like it will.
Mhm.
Just stop stressing yourself out trying to do it how you think.
Yeah,
So,
that's really good. Yeah. Okay. What is something you believe that most people don't, or many people don't? Let's say.
um So this is one going back to the funeral home thing. Most people are terrified of death. Most people think death is this horrible, horrendous, thing to be feared, thing we should flee from, thing we should avoid at all cost. And ultimately, yes, death from my worldview came from sin. It was a consequence. So no, it's not good. But going even back to Philippians 1:6, everything comes into completion and death has a purpose. And I've seen some really incredibly, wonderfully beautiful things come out of death that people would go, what? Like death is tragic. It's terrible. It's odd. There's
Yeah.
there's no redeeming qualities
Mm,
to it. And I go, yes, there are. And yes, we should have a healthy respect for it. But if you're grounded, death is nothing to be feared at
right.
all. And I think that's one of the most freeing things that I know I've experienced in my life. And, but again, you sound like a crazy person sometimes. People are like, "Wait, what? No
Yeah.
way." And I'm like, no. And you're not going to convince me otherwise because I've lived too much
Yeah.
your opinion is I'm wrong. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that gets back to, I mean, your faith is behind that. There's a scripture in Hebrews 2 where it basically says that there are people who had this fear of death and they were subject to bondage or slavery as a result of it. And people are literally in bondage or in slavery to the fear of death. Like
Yes.
you can't function, and everything you're doing is based on, I have to avoid this, I have to avoid this. And what you're saying is no, there are these incredibly beautiful things that can come out of it, and that is not a conventional
Oh,
way
it's
people
not.
people aren't saying, "Oh, yeah, that makes so much sense." No, people are not saying
No,
that.
and I just think back to the disciples when Jesus like, "I'm going to die,
No,
and
no,
then
of
I'll
course
come
not, Lord.
back. I'll
No,
come
no.
back, but I'm gonna die." And it was like, "No, like, you're the Messiah." I mean, Peter gets
Right.
rebuked for it.
Yeah.
"No, no, not
They
you." And Jesus like, "Yes, and it's gonna be the best thing that has ever happened for all of humanity."
Right.
And people just went, "Mm-mm."
I can't yeah, they could not conceive of it. Like,
That can't be the path. And
yeah.
he's like, "Yep, it is."
Yeah. Yeah. He didn't say it one time, he said it repeatedly, and they never were just okay. They never got it. He had to come back, and then they said, "Oh, okay. I I can kinda
Oh.
see it now." So, yeah, even for the disciples of Christ, it was an unconventional idea for sure.
Yes.
So, you got the 7 kids. What is a piece of wisdom or advice you would leave behind for your kids?
Um, you know, there are a lot of things that
Mhm.
I would probably and I do talk to my kids all the time.
Yeah.
Um, but I think really like the book of Ecclesiastes, which again, unconventional, like one of my favorite books in the Bible, the book of
Yeah.
Ecclesiastes. You know, people are like, isn't that like that dark, grim, like everything is meaningless? And I'm like, yeah, but there's a beauty behind it. And I actually think that is some of the best wisdom that I would leave is so many of these things in our life that we think are important and that we kill ourselves trying to get and that we chase and we go after and all this like it's vapor. It's truly vapor. And when you can actually believe it, not just say, no, yeah, I don't like that stuff. But your heart is still like, but actually, I desperately want it, or I'm white knuckling
Mm.
it. Like when you actually realize and believe the stuff is vapor, man, life is so much richer. It is so much richer. And I think that's something that I know I try and instill in my kids a lot. And even the people that I work with, the people I lead, the thing, and again, it's not me going, the book of Ecclesia, it's me saying,
Right.
I've seen how these things end. I've been at funerals. I've been at more funerals than most people will in their lifetime. And I've seen the things that so many people prioritize. I wrote an article on my LinkedIn once called, I don't even remember what it was called, but it was like the truth about death and life lessons I learned from death. And it was that wisdom in that.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. I'm kind of curious. Like, I mean, you have this background with funerals. Um, is there something that maybe most people or many people don't kind of do well when it comes to funerals or preparing for death that you just kind of kept seeing over and over again? Um, I know people often
Yeah.
struggle with it, but I would be curious from your perspective.
Um, I think one of the biggest things is going back to nobody wants to deal with it. And so everybody spends their life not wanting to deal with it. And tragically, it comes even people who are like, I expect, oh, we were expecting them to die. Like they
Mhm.
were stage 4 cancer, they were on hospice. It still never comes when you expect. It's
Right.
still never on the right time. And people go to ridiculous lengths to try and not deal with it. And to me, I've watched that ruin families. I've watched
Mm.
it destroy people's finances. I've watched it, just mess people up because they just don't want to deal with it. And as if somehow by not thinking about it and dealing with it, like you think you can escape this, you can't.
Yeah.
And actually embracing that allows you to go, okay. So how do I make sure I'm fully prepared? How do I make sure the people around me are fully prepared? How do I make sure I've done what I can? I can't control it. I can't do everything, but there are things that I can prepare for. I can help other people prepare for so that not only, are some of the technical things you got to take care of, but also some of the emotional things.
Hmm.
so that they aren't like I never got to say goodbye. Well, what are you waiting
Yeah.
for? If you
Yeah.
got broken relationships, go fix them. If you haven't told somebody you love them, go do it now. They might die tomorrow. Like, it's that kind of stuff that people's wanting to constantly not deal with it. That I would say is at the root of almost every chaotic thing that I've seen happen around death.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough for people, but again, that goes back to that fear of death thing. That it's just people don't want to talk about it, don't
I
want to
know. And it's
deal with
funny because
it.
people say it like, what's two things you can't avoid? Death and taxes. It's like, but do
Right.
you believe it? Because if
Yeah.
you believe it, you would act differently than
Right.
you do.
Yeah. You somehow think that maybe by not talking about it, it won't happen or something.
Right.
But yeah, that's not the case. Okay. So how, if someone wants to contact you, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I'm super active on LinkedIn. I'm not on a lot of social medias, so people can follow me on LinkedIn, and I'm super responsive on that. I've got a Substack, and a lot of people email me. They'll respond to the newsletters and things like that, or YouTube. So usually through those three channels is how most people get in touch with me.
Okay. Good. So check Christopher out on LinkedIn, YouTube, and you got a Substack. Yeah, I
Yep.
recently subscribed to that. So yeah, check that out. It's also future focused, kind of that kind of
Yep.
content. So if you're interested in that type of thing,
Yeah.
check him out. Anything else for the people? Like what are your parting words for us?
I think my parting words would be really, I mean, life is hard, but it's also can be really, really awesome.
Yeah,
And I think recognizing and holding that intention, there's a lot of scary stuff happening in the world, and I get it, but it's also going to be incredible. And I think which path that's going to be for people is far more in your hands than you realize. And so I
yeah,
think that would be kind of my parting encouragement is, yeah, it could suck
yeah,
for you, but it doesn't have to.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It could be bad, but it doesn't have to be. Yeah, that's good. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. Want to say thanks to Christopher Lynn for coming on the podcast today. This is the part that I've been struggling with so far. I'm only 4 episodes in, but you're supposed to be telling people to subscribe at the various places and YouTube, and I have to get some tips from you about what I'm supposed to be saying here in the outro. But I just basically say, yeah, subscribe on YouTube, or Buzzsprout is where I'm posting these right now. And
Okay.
until next time, keep asking questions and keep the faith. Thank you.